Hello internet user, my name is Gary of Gary's Wares. I make wooden pipes out of exotic hardwoods, but today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. This is where my scroll saw used to go. It broke on me, which is just as well because I wanted a bandsaw anyway. And so I've got about 3 days of downtime, so what I'm going to do is make a stand for my RIDGID Oscillating Spindle sander with edging attachment. The stand is going to consist of this base, which is supported by 4 legs, which have a stretcher at the bottom. I think this should be pretty good. General carpentry is something I don't usually do, so I hope I pull this off. I went to the Home Depot and I got a bunch of boards, and I should be alright if I mess up a whole bunch, which I very well may. And this is how I'm going to mill the lumber. I'm going to make 4 legs, a back and a front, a right side, a left side, and then 3 stretchers at the bottom. When doing things like this, over planning is something that can't really happen. So I like to draw out the actual length of the board on graph paper. That gives me not only the numbers, but a visual representation of what the board's going to look like, which I find helpful. I think this might be most helpful when you're using pieces of odd length like I thought I was going to have to, but I went to the Home Depot, like I said, and got those boards. Speaking of which, I'm losing daylight, so let's get to the miter saw. Now that the pieces have been cut and I'm not racing the sun, let me go over real quickly about the construction of this thing. I made a little model out of Legos, and this is basically how I'm going to do it. First, I'm going to build the base. Then, I'm going to attach the legs that already have the stretcher attached to them. Then I'm going to attach the other side. Then finally, I'm going to put the back stretcher in, and the basic construction will be done. The way I'm going to join everything together is with a joint called a half lap. I don't know a whole lot about joinery, but this article from woodmagazine.com helped me out a whole lot. And as it says here, a half lap joint consists of 2 work pieces reduced to half their thickness where they lap over each other. So for the base, I'm going to utilize this joint at the corners. This was the first test I did, and I didn't account for the curve of the blade when I did this. A quick way to tell how good your joint is by laying it out like this. I made the same mistake on both pieces, so the gap is twice the distance of the curve. Well, my second try I got with the program, and this is a little better. The surfaces are going to be glued, and there's also going to be a screw put in on each of the boards to help it stay in place better. Cutting the end grain on a table saw is kind of a tricky thing, so I made this jig here. It allows you to put the work up against the fence while maintaining pressure downward, but also not endangering your fingers. I'm going to use these scraps to line up the fence and the blade height as opposed to using the ruler every time. So, here we go. And there we are. That came out pretty well, but you're looking at the second attempt. What I found to be helpful is if you label one side, then every time you cut, put that side face down, whether that's facing the table or the fence. That way you'll get the desired effect. So now to screw and glue. The base is complete, and I think it's just about right. What matters the most are these anchor points here and here. They're a 1/2 inch up and 2 inches in. So long as these can make contact with the board, that's what matters the most. So now, on to making the legs. Before I make the legs, I'm going to install a switch and an electrical outlet. What this is going to do is it's going to let me just turn a switch, and it'll turn on both the sander and the shop vac, and I won't have to So I've laid these out on the board and marked where I need to cut out. This doesn't need to fit in there very tightly because it mounts on this hole, which is pretty wide and can be moved around. That's not a problem. So the switch is going to go on the front, and the outlet is going to go on the side, and the power cord is going to come out the back. The way I'm going to take this out is basically any way I can. I've got some spade bits. I'm going to drill a 1/2 inch spade bit in the corners. Then this is 1 1/8 inches. Take out, just most of it. Then I've got this rotary tool attached to a routing attachment. And then I'm going to clean up the sides with that. Then I'm going to take a file to the edges and clean it up, and I'll be back when I'm done with that. And it's done. I forgot to record me taking this out. Just as well, it wasn't very pretty. The best way to do this is to know what you're doing beforehand And if I had, I would have taken this to a scroll saw and I would have knocked it out real quick. So it's not very pretty, but it doesn't really need to be. It just needs to be able to fit in there, and just so long as this can be moved around a little bit. I drilled a hole exactly the width of the cable I'm using, and I also rounded over the hole. You're going to want to do that so the edges of the hole don't bite into the side of the cable. So now to wire it up. It's been wired, and I have 8 years experience working on microwave electronics, troubleshooting them, working down to component level, that sort of thing. And even though it's just a socket and a light switch, the first thing I did was I read the instructions twice. Electricity is deadly, deadly stuff. Ask Topsy the elephant. It takes less than half an amp to kill you, and 40 times that is coming through here. So if you don't have any experience with electronics or electricity or anything like that, do not attempt this. Here's a basic diagram of how it was wired. There's a power cable, and inside is a black and white cable. The black one's the live cable, the white one is the load. And so you just connect it in series. So now I guess I'll do the legs. The pieces have been cut to size and they came out pretty well. I'm going to assemble the legs and stretchers and attach it to the base, but before I do that, I'm going to put these casters on the bottom of each of the legs. It's assembled and everything works the way I want it to. Yay! Since the shop vac's on wheels and so's the stand, everything is mobile. I had planned on fitting the shop vac under here, but I hadn't planned on all the accessories being on the outside like that. That's really cool how that turned out. Now you see all this bare wood, all these blank spaces. Some of you out there may look at that and go, well, I want to paint that, or I want to stain that. I look at that, you know what I see? Potential. I've got about 6 or 7 ideas on how to pimp this thing out, and it's going to be cool. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a power strip right under there. The first thing you're going to want to do, well, not even the first thing, the 0th thing you're going to want to do is go over to where it's plugged in and unplug it. If you bought an illuminated switch like I did, you can tell real easily if it's plugged in or not. But then again, the switch may be faulty. This is how you make sure it's unplugged. You take the plug you have in your hand and you follow the wire all the way to where it leads and make sure it's connected to the thing that you're about to open up and potentially electrocute yourself with. Make sure that's the right plug you're holding. Then and only then do you go for the screwdriver. I installed a cable bracket to corral the cables, and the power cable is pretty tight in here, so the friction and the cable bracket are going to do a pretty good job of keeping that placed and stopping it from ripping out of the switch. But the power strip isn't going to have a hole like the power cord does, so I'm going to wrap the power strip cable around the cable bracket before installing it to the outlet. That way if it's pulled, the cable bracket will keep it in place and it won't rip out of the socket. This particular outlet lets you hook up other outlets in series, and I'm going to hook the power strip up to that with these cables. If you're doing this, I don't know what kind of outlet you have. All I know is I'm doing it as per the instructions for this particular model, so pay attention to your instructions. I connected the power strip cable as per the directions, and before you reconnect this to power, you want to make sure you reinstall the socket. Otherwise, you might electrocute yourself, and that's what we're avoiding with this tone of voice. The power strip has been mounted, and it can be dismounted to give me about 3 extra feet of length. I also mounted my battery charger and plugged that into the power strip as well. Next, I'm going to make a tray for this abrasive belt cleaner. I'm going to put it right about here. Well, this is awkward. I was in the middle of cutting some stuff and my dad's table saw went down. My advice to you, internet user, always maintain your tools. So I didn't get as far as I'd like to. This is going to be the tray for the abrasive cleaner, but this is a little shorter than I want it to be. I want it to be about a foot long. It's going to go right here, and it would have looked really cool. One thing I did manage to do was I made a holster for my orbital sander. I had one of these that was 1.5 inches, and that was just the right size to shape this. I did this exclusively on a 2-inch sanding drum. And it fits in just like that, and it goes pretty well. I'm getting a bandsaw today, but I'm doing an unboxing video on that, so I guess I guess I'm going to have to end the video here. So let me tell you about the ideas that I had. Sometimes I use little boxes like this to hold small pieces that I'm planing. I'm going to put a little tray right here that's going to be big enough to fit one of these in. And it's also just going to be like a general tray for small parts and that kind of thing. The main thing I didn't get to is going to go right here. It's going to be a storage for the sanding belts and the sanding drums. And I'm going to make it using a piece of wood and an 1/8 inch dowel. But all my cutters are down, so I can't really do that, can I? My dad suggested putting some pegboard here, which would be a great idea. But I don't really know what I want to do with this over here, so I'm going to wait. And I put in a nail for my brush. And now that has a home. One of my ideas was to cut a 1.5 by 1.5 block like this in half and drill a hole in it and glue it right there. And this would hold, say, a screwdriver or an awl or just random whatever. And you can put one of these on both sides or all the way down the legs, whatever you want to do. I was also going to make a hole for this brush over here on the sander, probably somewhere over in here right next to the tray. I mean, if you've ever played with Legos, that's basically what this is here. So you're only really limited by your imagination. I'm by no means done with this. And if you'd like to keep up with what I'm doing to it, follow me on Instagram, etc. and so on. And if you like the video, subscribe. Normally I do stuff like this, pipes, blah, 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 blah. So check me out, subscribe, do all the stuff. My name is Gary. I'm out.